Hi folks, Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the various devices that are used to outsource approving job applicants, particularly amongst large multinational organizations and government departments, quangos, and so on. Now, it's the outsourcing of background checks and employment history checks, checks on people, have they had a criminal history, that sort of stuff, or even checking on their alleged credentials. Do they have the 3 PhDs they claim they have, and so on. Now, there's been a recent event in the United States where a school board district, where a black man who was an illegal alien and a criminal and was under a deportation order was hired as to be the executive superintendent of a school district on quite big bucks, so something about 5 times the average wage was being paid to this guy, or of course taxpayers' money. And on top of the international travel and perks and expenses, this guy was doing very well, but he had no relevant credentials. Again, was an illegal alien and a criminal to boot. But the school board, or the board of commissioners that hired him, and this is something that's uniform really around much of the hiring process at so many levels and so many places, and this is really the essence of what this essay is about, is they outsourced all the background checking on the person. Now, the organization for doing the background checking is all the people employed there are minorities. They're black, they're brown, they're gay, they're lesbian. There's not a single straight white male either on the management team or employed there, as far as I could tell anyway. So the vetting process was, well, firstly, it wasn't done, but the supposed vetting process was conducted by, I would allege, radical social justice activists, not people who were concerned with doing a background check, or checking anything about as long as the candidate the job applicant is from a minority racial group or minority, they're LGBTQ, something like that. As long as they're from some sort of minority, then the practice is simply to approve them, to claim that there's been a background check, but just to approve them. Whereas if the applicant is a straight white male, then they're to be disqualified. There are intensive checks there, and they will go to huge lengths to find something that, when the straight white male was 5 years old at kindergarten, they once took a toy away from a black lesbian. They'll go to exhaustive lengths to find something, anything about to disqualify the straight white male, but they're not doing it in the reverse. Now, when you do some checking on some of these groups, it's not hard. Their background checks on minority applicants have 100% approval, not 50% or 60% or 100% approval. Whereas background checks on straight white males have 100% disapproval, as far as I can tell. So this is clearly an ideological gig here. There's nothing to do with facts or background checking at all. Now, it's also a money laundering front. So these people are charging $20,000 to $25,000 per background check. So now, given the amount of the many hundreds of people that are hired at executive level just in this school district alone, or in any other thing, this means that they're laundering tens of millions of dollars in effect through these supposed background check groups. So they're outsourcing the thing. So when it's found out that the person is a an illegal alien with a criminal record doesn't have any of the qualifications they claimed. Once that's the turn, so well, gee, we didn't know. We just gave it to those guys to do. They're the ones, that they checked and they said it was all okay. Now, when you're doing an interview with someone who has no qualifications, credentials, or anything like that, it's pretty apparent that they're not qualified. So you can ascertain that in 5 minutes. But as long as the person's a minority and diverse, and it's all part of the DEI and the black lesbian hiring quotas and this sort of thing, nobody really cares. Nobody really gives a shit whether the person is what they claim. Whereas if it's a straight white male, all the energy is put into disqualifying them, finding something, anything to disqualify them. It could be they got a parking fine, or they spat on the sidewalk 20 years ago. That's enough. So anything is enough to disqualify there, because it doesn't fit the DEI, affirmative action type quota system. Now, you can assume that, say, in education unions and just the very excruciatingly leftist view that teaching bodies and groups have, you would expect to see more of that there, but or more of that attitude. But we're actually seeing it outside of that. We're seeing that this idea of outsourcing key components of supposedly background checking and so on is being increasingly done. Now, there are new recruitment agencies that are popping up all over the place, whether it be in Australia or elsewhere, and these groups are supposedly doing the background checks and so on, and confirming the supposed credentials of the applicant and job applicant and so on. But again, you see the same pattern. An incredible number of minorities are getting the nod and the approval and the tick, even though they brazenly and blatantly do not have the qualifications. Whereas, again, the same thing occurs. The straight white male is rigorously and brutally background checked, to insane levels. A man in his mid-50s, they'll do a background check back to when he was 18 or 17. They never do that sort of thing for the minority. Now, as a recent example, there was an brand name organization. They've hired an executive vice president of strategy, and it's a woman who has never held such a job previously, and who held a relatively junior position in the government. She's never worked in the private sector. She's effectively just been a public servant, a junior to mid-level junior, clerk in the public service, and then gets hired and hugely increasing her income into a very senior executive role in the private sector. So how can that happen? I mean, it's not even possible, is it? Now, this person claims to have a master's in business marketing and that sort of stuff. You say, okay, well, maybe from an academic viewpoint, there's some absolutely minimal entry level. She meets a very low bar, but okay. But just 2 or 3 minutes checking on that, and you find no, actually, she's got a diploma from a 4th tier community college, and where nobody ever fails the course. So what's going on here? Why wasn't this person checked? Now, there have been cases where there've been brazen and blatant hiring of particularly, again, minority groups claiming to have qualifications they clearly don't have and obviously don't have. And there's a couple of times when it's interfered with sort of stuff that I'm doing. So I've mentioned it, and they get very defensive and protective. So no, it's okay. So the intention has been to hire the black lesbian, not to get a qualified person. And so in order to cover their own asses on this, they outsource well, we didn't do it. I mean, it was them. They're the ones. I just want to give you an idea. This actually involves a straight white guy, this particular, but I'll give you this example here just to show how unqualified the people are who are making the hiring decisions or even approving it. There was a guy this is again a strategy gig. there's a guy who's hired in a large brand name firm and in Australia, and the guy was again, the vice president, executive vice president of strategy. That's it. And the guy was hired, and he'd gone through an extensive and one would assume rigorous interviewing process, background check, and the whole thing. So and it was turned out that the guy had none of the credentials, qualifications, none, zip zero, none of the credentials and qualifications that he claimed to have. So, but no one had picked it up or found out. No one had worked out that the guy was a complete and total fraud. He didn't know anything. It wasn't like he just embellished his CV or maybe been a little creative. No, we're talking nothing. No, the guy didn't even meet the lowest of the low bars here. So how did this happen? Well, there's a series of events here, and you can sort of see how it, the senior executives in this company were sharing a high-priced call girl, the top drawer prostitute, and they were and the chairman of the board and the managing director of the CEO was screwing this prostitute, who they retained as pretty much a full-time sort of mistress on big bucks. She then gets a little bit older, and because she's developed a relationship with him, she's, look, I want to sort of move up the professional services value chain here, and I want to become an executive human resources consultant, which is a path many of them do go down, by the way. You'd be amazed at how many middle-aged women in human resource consulting have formerly been call girls. So she then gets the job to exclusively hire or recruit all the top executives for this brand name firm. And even though she's not qualified, she claims she is qualified because she understands what men with power want, given her occupation, her horizontal occupation previously. So she says that she has this very intuitive understanding, and that's what her qualifications are. So anyway, they're looking for this vice president of strategy or executive vice president of strategy, and she's tasked with finding somebody. Out of all the applicants that she gets, she puts only one guy forward. And the interview process after she claims she's vetted him, and yet he's the real deal. So then he has to meet the CEO. Then he meets separately the chairman. Then he meets the entire board of directors that grill him and ask him questions. Then he has to attend a couple of social functions. So it's like a cocktail party. And then they have the board of directors and this applicant, they have an intimate dinner. And then some of the other directors then separately meet with this applicant and so on. So after a lengthy, 10 plus interviews, they give him the nod and hire him. But they then press release him and say, well, he's got 100 PhDs and he was the executive director of such and such a company. Now it turns out the CEO of the company that was mentioned in the press release contacts him and says, look, I've never heard of this guy. What are you talking about? He never worked for us. And yet the guy had put on his CV that he worked with them for 10 years and was a superstar in developing their strategy. But no one ever checked. But the issue here isn't that the checking wasn't done necessarily, although that is an issue. The issue was that the top brass of this company, the people who've been tasked with running the business, who know the business, understand the business, direct the business, drive the business, make the investment decisions, that all of them interviewed this guy more than once. In some cases, like 5 or 6 times when it was the CEO. None of them, and all the questions they asked and the hours upon hours they spent, none of them picked up that the guy actually didn't have a clue. He'd never worked in that industry or an industry close to it previously. He'd never worked in strategy before. His claims of the PhDs, he never got them. He had nothing, none of the credentials that he claimed, but none of them picked it up. Now, if someone was coming to me and, I was interviewing somebody in my industry or an industry that I understood, it would take me about 5 minutes, not even that long, to work out they didn't know what they were talking about. Now, sure, they could give, some proverbs and throw some platitudes around and some, talking points sort of, that they could do, but it would become obvious pretty quickly that they didn't know. So then you say, okay, well, if you spent 10 years as a director of strategy and clearly you know nothing about it, how can I square that away? And so you could sort of go through, and then you'd work out, no, this guy's not in the business, we're wasting our time. So it wouldn't even get to the embarrassing stage of, but anyway, they hired the guy, everyone signed off and approved, and hey, this guy's really good. Wow, we're so lucky to get someone of this capability. And then it was found out, of course, he knew nothing. Now, he's a straight white guy in this case. So, but you wouldn't have needed to do the background checking. It was obvious he didn't have the knowledge or the qualifications to be even being interviewed, let alone get the job. But no one picked it up. So that demonstrates just how incompetent the executive management suite is and was in that situation and in many others. Now, all of these guys in the executive management level, all of them have been put in there by BlackRock type finance companies. They're just the little flunky stooges of the big money end of town. They're just installing, these useless, lazy socialites into these roles, these prestigious roles. I'm a director of science, into these prestigious roles. And of course, these guys don't know shit. They don't know squat. And they're the ones who are making the hiring decisions. They in turn sort of subconsciously accept, hey, we don't know, so we'll subcontract the checking and the verification, the background vetting out to their former high-priced call girl mistress in this case. So you can see the ingredients for disaster are just all over the place. But when it comes to hiring black and brown people, particularly if they're recent immigrants, it's pretty much impossible to check the background. And I've personally come across this. If someone says they got a 2 PhDs from the University of Ouagadougou or Bombay or some fucking third world shithole, there's no real way of checking the systems and the processes and what. So if they just put a bit of paper in front of you, you just got to nod in agreement. Yeah, okay, fine. Because you can't query it. Now I can query it by asking questions. And once you start asking the questions, then you realize, hey, this guy doesn't know anything. But when you're under a lot of pressure from, as I was at the time when I was having to hire black and brown people, you're under a lot of pressure from the board of directors, then you go along with these, hire the people, even though I'm not sure this guy's going to really work. I don't think he's got the qualifications, but because you're getting pestered at every meeting, you say, why haven't you hired any black and brown people? Then you think you do it just to shut them up. But I've had to fire every single one. I've had to fire, and they don't have the qualifications, credentials they claim, the experience they claim they don't have, the tertiary qualifications they claim they don't have. And it's, again, not like they're embellishing. They're saying that, well, they got a master's, but they're saying it's a PhD, or they've got a graduate diploma, but claiming they got a graduate degree, claiming they got an advanced degree, or saying that, well, I worked for 10 years this company when it's really only 9 years. Or I don't mean those sort of little fuzzy bits at the edges, which I tend not to worry about anyway. But can they do the fucking job? That's the issue. And they can't. They're not even remotely or minimally qualified. And what we're seeing all across the Western world now is that the hiring people don't care, particularly if it's taxpayer money or if the company's in receipt of cozy government contracts that they just paid. There's so much money flowing in the front door without having to compete for it and provide quality services or work. There's just so much money pouring in the front door. They don't care about it. It's irrelevant. The only issue is how many black lesbians do they have in the race gender quota listing. That's all that matters. And the outsourcing of the background checking is just a way they can remove themselves by one step from the accountability of hiring illegal alien criminals. You've been Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.